Are you truly stepping into the role of leader in your own life, the way you know you're meant to? What shifts would unlock your full potential? It's time to explore those answers with the host of Sacred Leadership, intuitive business coach Sherisse Alexander.
Welcome everyone to Sacred Leadership with Sherisse. On today's episode, I am joined by Erin. And today, what we will be talking about is exploring what it truly means to live consciously free in a world built on systems designed to keep us distracted, disconnected, and dependent. Freedom is something we often take for granted, but are we really free? Or have we traded discernment for convenience and authenticity for acceptance? Today's conversation challenges us to look beneath the surface of our daily choices, our work, and even our spiritual practices to uncover the deeper conditioning that shapes how we think and live. Today, as I mentioned, Erin Scott is going to dive into the intersection of truth, consciousness, and sovereignty, exploring how societal, religious, and economic structures influence our sense of self and what it takes to awaken from inherited beliefs. A little bit about Erin. Erin speaks about contemporary societal systems that prevent us from reaching higher levels of consciousness. He is committed to awakening people to the scaffolding of the modern world, dominant institutions, societal systems, and cultural conditioning, and how those forces create schisms both within the individual and throughout society. His insights aim to reconnect people with their natural internal coherence, reframe obscured identities, and challenge inherited beliefs. He has depth and knowledge in the origin and existing function of our dominant economic, medical, education, and religious systems and how they practically impact humanity. Erin is an Amazon #1 bestseller author with his book, Before We Forget, The Guide to Personal and Collective Awakening, which provides a coherent path for awakening in the modern world. So Erin, I know I said a lot about you, but why don't you tell us, first of all, welcome and thank you for joining me so much today. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? I'm actually super excited about chatting with you today and, how your work evolved and how you got to where you are today. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much for having me. I don't know if I could do a better job than that. I feel like you covered all the you covered all the hot topics here. Those are big shoes to follow, to fill. Um,
Yeah.
I've got a little bit of a cold, so I apologize. But I mean, I think you really kind of covered it all there. I have really kind of I kind of like got a keen interest in a lot of these kind of topics, through kind of like personal introspection, through observation, and just kind of like, for as long as I can remember, just kind of like looking at the sort of innate nature of our reality, and trying to kind of like peel back the layers on, of human consciousness and trying to understand really, why we live the way we do, act the way we do, have structured society the way that we do. And I was, obviously we're kind of fed this kind of, indoctrination where we're taught things like, Darwinian principles, survival of the fittest. We're taught that capitalism is the best economic model. We're taught that, we're brought up into the system, and we're never really taught to question anything. We're never really taught to think critically when it comes to these really kind of like fundamental tenets. And I just didn't satisfy me. And for as long as I can remember, like I said, I've been kind of probing, and I've been looking to uncover, kind of like the secret sauce, like what's going on, what's happening underneath, what's the compass, what's the engine, right? And I've been kind of on this journey for maybe in a passive sense for maybe 20 years now, to be honest with you. Maybe in a more acute sense, as kind of I caught up with maybe kind of like my path kind of accelerated maybe in the past 2 years. But I was deeply interested in philosophy and economic theory in college, and I jumped into a career on Wall Street, which is sort of like interesting. But I was always, again, we were kind of indoctrinated that we go to school where we need to be focused on money, we need to be focused on performance, we need to be focused on the material goods, et cetera, et cetera. So it really kind of, I think, blends nicely and adds a really interesting perspective with respect to the context of these topics. So anyway, that was a lot, and hopefully we can peel back the layers here and dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, it is a lot. But the reason why I was really excited about talking to you is because of where you actually began, right? And diving into Wall Street. And it feels so similar to my own story. And, I didn't take philosophy, but always asking these questions about like, is this all there really is? Is this it? We're just gonna go out there and make money and do and push harder and survival of the fittest. And at some point, I often say to people, I'm like, at some point, money just isn't it anymore. Acquisition of things isn't it. So, like you said, you've kind of been passively on this journey for 20 years, but really, we'll say, jumped to an accelerated journey 2 years ago. What happened 2 years ago, if you don't
Yeah,
mind
I
me
mean,
asking?
I kind of had an acute moment where I um, was just really unhappy with, I don't know, everything. And I had been
Mm,
really, I had kind of like pushed myself to such an extreme, right? And now people talk about the imbalance between the masculine and the feminine energies. People
mm-hmm.
talk about how there's this sort of focus on the material world, on the material goods. People talk about, overextended capitalism. I mean, there's many ways to kind of frame the
Yeah.
discussion, right? But it's all kind of like part of the same vein, which is, I had really suppressed an entire part of myself. I had focused so myopically on living a life based on the guideposts, based on the beacons that we were taught were important, right, to succeed and survive in this paradigm. And I reached a breaking point where, I was suffering professionally, I was suffering on a personal basis, I was suffering with my relationships. I was going, my marriage was completely destroyed. I wasn't spending time with my, my kids. And I just kind of said, like, what the heck is going on here? What am I doing? What was this all about? And am I on the right trajectory? And I kind of like looked at my situation and I said, if I stay on this path in 2 to 3 years, I'm just going to be I'm going to be this hollow husk of a person. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to recognize myself. And I kind of said, okay, I'm going to step into the void and I'm going to, kind of like start putting together my understanding, my worldview in a coherent fashion. And it really kind of became the framework and the basis for my recent book, Before We Forget, which you so kindly mentioned at the onset. And yeah, so that's, I guess, my best way of articulating what transpired.
Yeah, makes sense. You woke up and you're like, is this it? Is this all that
Right. Well,
there? Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, it wasn't even like I kind of like knew it wasn't it, but I was kind of like being pragmatic. I was always
Yeah.
pragmatic, like
Yeah.
this. I get it that this isn't satiating me, but kind of like, well, I didn't really care to look deep enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah,
So from there, I imagine you then started to peel back the layers.
I started to take kind of the framework and my understanding of the nature of our reality. And I have a deep understanding of sort of the societal systems, the institutionalized nature of our reality, right? That was
Mm-hmm.
kind of like my framework. That was my kind of like my bedrock. But
Yeah.
you know, what I ended up doing was, and I think this is what makes my book so relevant and I think meaningful, is I started kind of creating coherence between these social constructs and the universal laws, the universal coherence that we have somehow forgotten, as well
Mm-hmm.
as the link between these systems and the individual, and kind of what transpires when we live amid schisms and when we allow a deeply sort of fragmented reality around us sort of become our consciousness. And we don't realize
Mm-hmm.
that we embody the consciousness of our systems, but in truth, we do. And most of us just think to ourselves, "Oh, that's just the way it is." But in truth,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just the way it is. And
Yeah.
this kind of I can parlay that into this. I have a big problem with well, a few of the guilds of the spirituality movements, but we can get to that later. But with the idea that we are in this matrix heralded by puppeteers, and we're victims, right? I mean, this is like, granted, there are people who have interests and they look to control industry and things of that nature, but in truth, we are so powerful, and we are
Yeah.
actually the ones that hold the keys. And this isn't
Yeah.
cliche. This isn't a tongue-in-cheek statement. We do, and it's important. I also felt that it was important to give people the tools to
Yes.
realize that, and to bring real sovereignty and awareness to people, because we live our lives amid many illusions. We can talk about that on a metaphysical level. We can talk about that with our relationship with source, or the divine nature of the universe. We could also, but we also could talk about that with respect to how we self-identify, how we value
Hmm.
our worth, how we value our relationship with ourselves, and we are so cut off from that discourse, right? And I think that with kind of the map that I provide, and with my approach, I think that it's a really, really powerful representation of how to kind of look at yourself, and your place in the greater cosmos, if you will.
Yeah. And that's ultimately the point and the purpose of this particular platform, right? Sacred Leadership with Sherisse. It's like, you know, a lot of what I also have learned over these years has been, I'm trying to invite people to show up as leaders in their lives, leaders in their communities, leaders in their businesses and their organizations. And a lot of that, I think, speaks to what you were talking about, because they're not mutually exclusive. There does need to be internal reflection. There does need to be, looking at how we show up and the shadow sides of ourselves that we don't necessarily always want to be confronted with, and being really, really honest and authentic with ourselves first. Forget what we're showing other people, but I mean, really, the honesty begins with ourselves. So let's talk about illusions and the illusion of freedom. So we're all free. So what I would ask you is, how can we begin to recognize that we're still actually unconsciously bound?
Sure. So I would say that, well, we can talk about that, but we'll get into there's a bunch of different kind of pervasive illusions, but let's start there for sure. So I think that one of the kind of most pervasive, most influential sort of ways that we create kind of prisons of our mind are through our education system in the United States, through that particular indoctrination program. And when you look at the origin story of that structure, of that construct, of that system, and you look at who created it and why it was created, you start running into real problems, right? You
Mm,
start understanding that, at the turn of the 20th century, during the Industrial Revolution, the entire system was structured by industrial capitalists. They adopted what's called the Prussian model. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And in doing so, their aim was not to cultivate true wisdom, was
mm,
not to cultivate understanding of self, was not to cultivate critical thought. It was to create docile, predictable workers, to
yeah.
to operate as, in many ways, kind of like cogs in a wheel. And it wasn't just about the impracticality of what was being taught, right? I mean, we can all kind of that kind of resonates with us. We're kind of like, okay, well, great, we've memorized the periodic table of elements. Cool. I don't know how to file my taxes. Right? I mean, like, it's such a
Yeah.
ridiculous thing when you think about it. It's like, why we spent 12 years of our lives. I mean, and what do we come
Hmm.
out with to live, right, fruitfully in this world? But in a metaphysical sense, and I think this is kind of like a big thread that's missing in our everyday lives. Obviously, we're detached
Mm,
from the sacred, the divine, the spiritual, but this is part of a bigger kind of metaphysical ecosystem. And what it teaches, when you're sitting in a classroom at a young age for 7 hours a day, and you're told to digest information and regurgitate it, when you're not allowed to be active and
yeah.
experience wonder, right? And your sense of worth is defined by the gold star or the grade, when you submit to an authority figure who is, again, dictating to you. Right? This embeds an infrastructure, and
Yeah.
the infrastructure is one that is obviously normative, but it's also hugely utilitarian. It tells you that your worth is defined by your output. It tells you that your worth is defined
Hmm.
by what you produce. certainly it creates conformity and docility. But do you think that, I mean, should we be so naive as to think that that ends once you graduate? I mean, it's an indoctrination program. It's meant to last, right?
Yeah.
So while there is an argument that, human nature is savage, which is only a half truth, we can get into that later, but and that we're wired to compete and kill, and right, again, a half truth, but what it does is it creates a scaffolding, not only for your identity and your worth, but through how you look at the world around you.
Yeah.
When you are programmed to always look to achieve, well, it creates a vacuum of meaning, right? So we can keep going down that path, but this is an important, crucial piece of information that people are not aware of, that people are detached from, but that ought to resonate with those spirits there. Are you running a seance over there? What's going on, Sherisse?
I'm in Nigeria, and energy poverty is real, so I hope I don't lose internet.
Got it. I'll try to summon something over here to help protect the light. So yeah, I mean, it's and what's funny is because even now with just kind of the way that human consciousness is and the way society is, even to kind of like bring this topic up, is like hugely kind of like woo woo, and like it's which is to me so crazy. I mean, this is a real cause and effect kind of situation here. So the point is that the point to this discourse, and the point to me kind of uncovering these truths and revelations, if you will, not just with respect to the education system, but with respect to other kind of accepted constructs or inherited beliefs that we assume to be correct, is that if we don't see things for what they are, we will never evolve. We will never have a full understanding, a complete ability to digest the entirety of the situation. And for me, this whole thing is about the evolution of human consciousness, and how do we evolve without all of the complete information, with complete truths and not operating through illusions. And this, and to tie this back, right, we have shackled ourselves to the illusion that we are our job, our cars, our homes, our bank account. This is a complete fraud, right? And but most of us live our lives identifying that way. We create a prison in our mind, and the unfortunate part is there is an inherent rigidity, there is an inherent limitation when you look at your life that way. Why? Well, because you are chained down by the structure of the system, and the system, which we haven't really dove really deep into, but it's inherently linear. It's based on manufactured scarcity. That's how it thrives. That's the engine, right? That's how power structure takes form and retains its power. But the real world, the universal consciousness, if you will, doesn't operate on linear terms. It doesn't operate with these kind of restrictive, regimented rules that we've used to structure our society. So a quick foray into the illusions that we create in our mind right there.
Yeah, and we will continue that. We are going to head to our first commercial break, but when we come back, we will dive more into that. We'll be right back.
Leadership isn't reserved for CEOs or world leaders. It's something each of us is called to embody in our own lives. But how do you awaken that inner leader with clarity and confidence? On Sacred Leadership with intuitive business coach Sherisse Alexander, you'll discover powerful tools and spiritual insights to align your words, actions, and outcomes. Tune in every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, 9 Mountain, and 8 Pacific, right here on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, You can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email becomeahost@inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is Sacred Leadership with Sherisse Alexander. To participate in the program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also send an email to Sherisse@pavitraleadership.com. Now back to the program.
Welcome back to Sacred Leadership with Sherisse on the Inspired Choices Network. My name is Sherisse, and I am joined here today with Erin, where we are talking about reclaiming conscious sovereignty in a programmed world. And right before we went to break, Erin was diving into a question that I asked around illusion and breaking free of that illusion around freedom. So the next question I actually had for you is, okay, great. Let's say you recognize, Erin, like, yeah, okay, maybe things are not as I thought they were. And I think that's a tough truth for people to come face to face with. How do you then begin to peel back? And I love what you said around, the world that we live in is very linear. But when you start to infuse the pieces of the divine and the universe and spirituality, and I say this to my people all the time, it's not linear. It is, as soon as you try to make sense of it in a spiritual sense, it is like you'll break your logical brain on it. So how did you begin to do this for yourself? I turn it over to you.
Yeah. So, I think that when you are living amid illusion, when you are living amid fragmentation, well, I guess let me back this up for a second so I can form this more coherently. We live amid illusions, right? But I think one of the biggest illusions is the illusion of separateness, illusion of separation, and this is the pervasive kind of illusory structure of our reality. And we can talk about this across many different planes. Talk about this with respect to human consciousness, with respect to biology, with respect to ecosystems, quantum physics. I don't know how much you want me to dive into that, but when illusion of separation becomes the kind of underlying framework for our reality, when we are living under the myth of separation, if you will, right? The idea of sort of our connection to things becomes a problem. So like for example, the universal nature of the universe operates through polarity, right? That this is how creation takes form. And what happens is we mistake this idea of polarity with the idea of complete opposites, when in truth, the way that the universe creates, and then by virtue of the way the universe creates, the way that we create, is through the rubbing up against of these polarities, but also in a coherent manner, right? In a balanced fashion. So for example, when you have this masculine versus feminine, as an example of one of these polar kind of relationships, when you have a society that is hugely masculine, right? Driven by logic, driven by linearity, driven by output, metrics, etc. These non-intuitive, non-emotional, non-caring sort of variables. When you have a society that's structured that way, well, people don't realize it, but the individuals that human beings, when they live amid these structures, they start embodying that consciousness. So we then must contort ourselves to accommodate that structure, and we must do so because our survival depends on it. If we have to work 90 hours a week to survive, well, then we must do that. Right. But what does that do to us internally? What does that do to, well, it fragments us. It stifles also, just very simply, it stifles the spiritual, the psychological parts of ourselves. We aren't able to rest. We aren't able to recuperate. Right. This is the need for this, the idea of regeneration and balance is all throughout the natural world. I mean, we don't tear down an entire rainforest and then it grows back in a snap of a finger, right? Yeah. The sun rises and sets. Cortisol levels in our bodies rise in the morning and go down. And so we are pegged and we are tuned into this natural order and this natural rhythm. And when we sever ourselves, we need to somehow recuperate. We need to somehow find that balance. That was a very long introduction, but some of the best ways you can do this, so you can shed this illusion of separateness, is doing it kind of across multiple planes, because we exist across multiple planes, and these topics lend themselves to multiple planes of reality and to our lived experience. But one of the most important things that I think is that we need to realize that we are all connected to everybody around us. Human beings are connected to other human beings, and this is actually part of our biology. We have mirror neurons in our brains. When somebody smiles, it's as if we are smiling. When we are trying to heal, it's beneficial to be around somebody else. This is neuroscience. This is psychology. I mean, this is science. I know a lot of people think of these topics as like spiritual and abstract, but in truth, they are not anymore. We've transcended that understanding of these things, which is hugely important, because it adds a real practicality to these conversations, which I think people are just kind of need, right, when you're over dependent on kind of like the logical mind. I like to do things that shed this illusion of separation, of separateness. I do things like things as simple as giving giving without expecting anything in return. Whether it's handing a homeless person money in the street, whether it's devoting your time to a food pantry, whether it's helping somebody out, checking in on somebody you haven't spoken to in a while. When you give when you give with care and without expectation in return, it dissolves that separateness. You become bonded to that person. Another huge part of this is when you have fragmented yourself from an entire part of yourself, like I did my entire life. You need to find this rebalancing, and one of the most impactful ways to do this is through breath work, through meditation, through finding that balance internally, because most of us live our lives numb, never connected to who we are, never truly understanding that this should be as common practice as waking up and brushing your teeth in the morning. I mean, this is not the way that we live in our world, but to me it's like almost kind of crazy. But it's about reintroducing these sacred practices to your everyday life. It should be habitual. It should be part of the conversation. You should be doing breath work throughout the day. Like at lunchtime, you're doing breath work. When you're, I can keep going down kind of like this checklist, but other somatic practices, using resonance, using frequencies to recalibrate. I mean, we are like the most
we're energetic
intricate,
beings.
Sophisticated machine tied to the spiritual realm and tied to I mean, we require things more than drinking alcohol and scrolling through TikTok. I know people don't want to hear it, but like we have to kind of care about ourselves on a deeper level.
Well, I think that, and all of what you said, I agree with wholeheartedly, right? And and you talked about breath work, and it's interesting that you talked about breath work, because somebody reminded me today. I was up here and they were like, just breathe. And the minute I took like 5 seconds to just totally tune into it, and I mean, I know this. I was having a meeting even today in my office, and somebody was amped the minute they started their day today. And I'm like, why are you giving away your power like that? Like, there's nothing that's going on here that we can't sort through. Like the building is safe, we're all safe, and let's just breathe. So I think that part of what I wrote down here was balance. And there's a lot of information out there. My partner often sends me reels that talk about, work hard and, what are breaks and there's no rest and, all this other kind of stuff. Work-life balance. Who's that? Like, what is that? Right. And I keep saying to him, I said, I think you misunderstand what I mean when I say work-life balance. I work really hard, but at the same time, what I've said even on this show is like, I also take a lot of downtime. I know exactly how to recharge my batteries, and it's not laying on beaches, although that's very lovely. It's not, I mean, it's a multitude of things, but it's those daily, what I call energetic hygiene things that we need to do for ourselves, those mental hygiene things, right? Like breath work, starting your day with I love starting my day, recalling my dream. Was there something in it for me? Getting really centered and doing like the breath work and the somatic work, paying attention to my body and these kinds of things. So really, we're going to talk more about this when we come back from break in a moment.
Leadership isn't reserved for CEOs or world leaders. It's something each of us is called to embody in our own lives. But how do you awaken that inner leader with clarity and confidence? On Sacred Leadership with intuitive business coach Sherisse Alexander, you'll discover powerful tools and spiritual insights to align your words, actions, and outcomes. Tune in every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, 9 Mountain, and 8 Pacific, right here on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is Sacred Leadership with Sherisse Alexander. To participate in the program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also send an email to Sherisse@pavitraleadership.com. Now back to the program.
Welcome back to Sacred Leadership with Sherisse on the Inspired Choices Network, where I am joined by Erin Scott. Before we continue on with our really interesting conversation, if you are enjoying this show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes. I would be super grateful, and this will assist in getting the information out to those that need it. So right before the break, Erin, we were chatting about reclaiming your sovereignty in this land that we live in, and I was asking you about how you can begin to break down the illusion, and you and I were talking a little bit about breath work and somatic practices. Is there anything else that you do that really keeps you grounded? And before you answer that, what I am also curious about is you did come from the world of global finance. So did you start that work or this journey while you were still there? And do you infuse these practices in your day-to-day work and life right now? I mean, I know you do in your life, but I mean, how does it show up in your workplace is what I really mean.
Yeah, I absolutely infuse them in my daily life. They're part of my, they're just as crucial as I was kind of alluding to, brushing my teeth and, combing my hair. Although I do wear a hat too much, so I'll reassess the comparison to combing my hair. But no, they're absolutely a part of it. I've always been incorporating breath work and meditation in my life. I think that meditation started becoming more mainstream maybe about like 10 years ago. I think with apps and with I think more of an integration of kind of Eastern health practices. I think that I kind of latched onto it. I figured why not? I mean, I was drinking a lot like every day after work, and it kind of like you never kind of really did it. I didn't sleep well, and I said, what's the downside here? I might as well give it a chance. I started incorporating quite recently, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, listening to different hertz and kind of like playing around with that and seeing how that resonates with me. And I found it to be, although at times I can't necessarily pinpoint which hertz impacts me and in which way, they're always in some way beneficial. They always in some way relax me and ground me, and kind of allow me to kind of reintegrate with who I am, for sure. And I kind of wanted to kind of piggyback off of what you just said and what we were discussing before, and with respect to your personal experience, and you're absolutely right. The whole idea here is not about not working, right? Like crawling into a cave and meditating and detaching from society or reality. It's really it's about honoring your balance. And it's about honoring your individual needs, right? And in truth, when you look at the universal laws, for example, when you look back at how the natural world thrives and creates, right? It's all about creating from internal coherence. It's all about creating from a place of meaning. And it's about you being the one who determines the trajectory of your ambition, you choosing from a place of honesty and of truth. This is why the truth movements resonate so well with people kind of on the path of awakening and spirituality. Well, it's because the soul or whatever deeper self that you are, it resonates with truth, right? It seeks truth. It doesn't seek distortion, right? So a little bit metaphysical there, but the purpose with all of this, and you talked about how getting frazzled and having to kind of like rebalance and recenter. This is also a discussion about not allowing the external world to control you, but about you being the one who's in control, right? And this is kind of a big part of the discussion. I think that is often missed. And this is really a crucial part of kind of my effort, because it's not just about dissecting and critiquing and trying to poo-poo our modern day systems. It's about seeing them for what they are and then rising above them, or taking back your sovereignty from them, right? And although a lot of these practices are essential, people still need to make that leap cerebrally. They still need to understand, or rather they need to see things for what they are, right? And I think that although this one's kind of hard to grasp for a lot of people, another hugely kind of beneficial understanding or kind of like cerebral digestion, if you will, is recognizing that you are not your emotions or your thoughts, right? You experience them, but it's up to you whether you allow them to control you or whether you're going to control them. This is all part of the same kind of ecosystem, and it's about bringing people back into alignment with themselves, and from that alignment, they find their autonomy, they find their sovereignty, because again, they're rooting themselves in who they truly are. They're creating, they're working because they're passionate about it. They want to, right? They're not being forced to through fear or driven by their egoic mind for some external gratification. I mean, whatever. This is kind of a maybe something that is not always kind of discussed when people are critiquing social systems and institutional structures, if you will. But is really kind of what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's how do we live within that, right? Because the systems are what they are. And there was something that you said earlier that I wanted to come back to, and it's, the idea that our external reality is our own creation. And that is often something that I'm careful who I say that to. Because, especially if we're stuck in a little bit of a victim mindset, but and there was in a book I'd read quite a few years ago, and it was Conversations with God. And one of the questions being posed was, well, why is the world such a horrible place? God's like, well, why are you thinking such horrible things? Like, you're creating it. So if you don't like what you're seeing, then do something different. And, I think when I'm in conversation with people, and, I was using the colleague that was really amped this morning as an example, it's like and this is how I do it in the work environment. And I do this personally as well as, what's your contribution to this situation? Whatever it is, right? And so you could make that as small as you want in the workplace or personally, or you can expand that into your community, your city, and then the world, obviously, that we live in as a whole. So every single one of us with our words and our actions and our energies and allowing those things to go unchecked is really where we are right now. So it's beginning to see that and not being, I think sometimes people are then desirous of rolling into guilt and shame. Once the realization is there, like, oh my gosh, I am creating this. No, it's not a blame thing. It's not a right or a wrong. It's quite simply, you didn't know any better. We are now bringing it to the consciousness. So now you can choose. So now if you choose to do this, well, now you're doing it eyes wide open. Now you know fully what you're creating. But if you don't like it, then make a different choice. And it's not right or wrong. It's just in alignment or outside of alignment, which brings me to the question around, and maybe we've been talking about this, but for you, what does it mean to live awake inside of these systems? Because you did say, sometimes people think that that means, oh, you got to go now live in a cave or, be a monk and, meditate for 12 hours out of the day. But you got to find a way to integrate these things. And I think that's often where people get stuck when we talk about the metaphysical and spirituality and how do we make it practical and digestible for the average person.
Absolutely right, and I agree with everything you said previously. I think that's spot on. We're definitely we're definitely kind of talking the same language here. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this whole idea of the human experience, of having, of being the creators of our reality, this is all about taking the deeper knowledge, taking the higher level of consciousness and integrating and embodying that, and then acting as kind of a transmission to the world around you, right? And this is really, this is something I alluded to this previously about, some of the spiritual movements where, and as maybe as good intended as people are, where they start getting into all this nomenclature, this vernacular of like the astral planes, and they're channeling the Pleiadian star seeds from this galaxy, and then they're doing a dance and wearing a headdress and they're painting their faces. Like, this is great if this works for you, but this is not, in my opinion, this is not about the evolution of human consciousness. This is not about bringing people to living awake in
well, it
the
has to be
lived.
accessible, and that's not
That's
accessible
right.
for everybody. Yeah.
Exactly. And again, I kind of look at the way that we've constructed our systems, the way that most of us live, the way that most of us live our lives and our level of consciousness is almost kind of like an immature consciousness. It's where when we are living through primarily the egoic mind, this is a lower level consciousness. You can say that it's a lower frequency. You can say that it's, however you want to, again, characterize it. We should get caught up on words with a lot of this stuff, but this is about evolving consciously, individually, so that other people can evolve consciously, and then then people won't look to live the way that they did, because they realized, to your point, that that wasn't maybe the best way to live. That wasn't maybe the best way to look at the situation. That wasn't the best way to treat our loved one, to work that day, to whatever it might be, right? So this is what the discussion's about. And to me, you don't get there unless people like you and other people like me are kind of offering that perspective and giving people the tools to see the coherence, to see what's going on behind the scenes, to understand through people with practical, real world experience. Again, I worked on Wall Street for close to 20 years, right? So I have a deep understanding of not just these systems, but at least my experience with it, and understanding those around me and kind of how they look at their reality. And many of them, in truth, they're operating from a lower level consciousness. They might be brilliant. They might have PhDs. They might have, master's degrees. They might have whatever accolades, but it doesn't mean that they're evolved consciously. It just doesn't, right? Yeah. This is not what this paradigm values. This is not what is rewarded in this paradigm presently. But if we can offer people information and perspective and knowledge, then the human consciousness, the collective consciousness, will evolve, and we will see that there's another way to look at something, and we will see that the way we're doing things might not be the optimal path, might not be the best way.
Yeah, and I think that, to your point, more conversations like this, and each one teach one, is something that somebody had said to me, and I use it every now and again, because it's not, I'm not jamming anything down your throat. I think we're inviting people to shift their perspective, and can we do it in a way where we are not judging someone? So, you speak about the folks on Wall Street, zero judgment. Maybe that's your journey. Maybe that's your contract. Maybe that's your path. There's maybe something that you need to learn in this life with that experience. I don't know what your contract says. You don't know what his contract says. So how can I judge, right? And once you start, and I think that's sometimes why we have to talk about it in the spiritual or the metaphysical way, because as another friend had said, if we consider life this beautiful symphony, I'm playing my instrument, you're playing yours. I can't read your sheet music. I can hear you, I can see you, but I can't actually read your sheet music, so I don't actually really know what's coming next. And then think about like the broader perspective of that. That is how I think that I like to use the analogy of life and all the other folks that are in it or in my experience with it, right? We really don't know what each one of our journeys looks like. So it allows me to move into, even when people upset me or even when I'm angry or I feel hurt, regardless of whatever the story is like we're all just playing our instrument and trying to make some beautiful frequencies. So, you know, we are going to continue on this. I want to talk a little bit about the book that you wrote when we return from this next break. I'm really enjoying this chat. Thank you so much, Erin, for joining me here today. We'll be right back.
Leadership isn't reserved for CEOs or world leaders. It's something each of us is called to embody in our own lives. But how do you awaken that inner leader with clarity and confidence? On Sacred Leadership with intuitive business coach Sherisse Alexander, you'll discover powerful tools and spiritual insights to align your words, actions, and outcomes. Tune in every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, 9 Mountain, and 8 Pacific, right here on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is Sacred Leadership with Sherisse Alexander. To participate in the program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also send an email to Sherisse@pavitraleadership.com. Now back to the program.
Welcome back to Sacred Leadership with Sherisse on the Inspired Choices Network. Today, I am joined by Erin Scott, where we are chatting about reclaiming conscious sovereignty in a programmed world. And we were just about to chat a little bit about the book that Erin wrote. We've got 7 short minutes left in today's show, but I do want to know what inspired the book that you wrote before we forget, and what have we collectively forgotten about who we are?
Sure. What inspired the book? What inspired the book was, I kind of, and we spoke about this briefly. I really kind of felt this fracturing throughout my whole life, and this like almost like slow chips, just like slow chipping away these like small infusions of trauma, they were self-imposed in many ways, and I broke more than once, and I was kind of like, what am I missing here? I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing. I'm checking all the boxes. Like I'm supposed to win, right? And I was quote unquote winning, right, from the outside world. But I felt that something at the fundamental nature of our reality was off. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of like on this mission through very pragmatic, practical, hands-on. I always kind of kept in the back of my mind, like, what if this guy that I worked with next to me, right, picked up this book, and I wanted to make sure that what I put in this book could in no way, shape, or form be looked at as crazy, right? Like, or like outlandish or ethereal, or that was literally like my guidepost in the back of my mind. I was like, I want to put something out there that shows people who are on their unique paths, that shows people who are on this path of awakening. And again, people call it different things. It's kind of like what I use to kind of bucket it, but who are on this deeper journey, and make them feel like they're actually the ones that are living closer to reality. I mean, that was literally what I was trying to do, and to show that it was the kind of like the common person, or the everyday person, the sleepwalker, the zombie, whatever you want to call them, right? Or however you want to call us, because I'm still sleepwalking and still a zombie in many ways too. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm perfect, about standing on a mountain like casting judgment. Yeah. That's not what this is about. But it's about saying, look, there's something deeper here, and oh, by the way, I want you to read this, and I want you to say to me, I don't agree with everything you're saying, right? That was kind of like my approach. So to me, this was like almost like a self-vindication. It was kind of like in many ways written as in an arc where the first part of my book is called The Fracture, where I focus on illusions, the illusions that are embedded in our world and our society with respect to how we look at the natural world, our relationship to it, how we look at other people and our relationship to other people, how we understand our relationship to source. I talked deeply about the fractures, the disconnections that institutionalized religion has created, and how not only how it's created with respect to the personal, the individual relationship with source or God or the one, however you want to call it, but also, and this is what's missed, how religion actually wrote the blueprint for modern society, how religion actually serves as the framework. And this is why when I hear people, oh, religion, no one's really religious anymore. It's like, yeah, you're right, but I don't know if you know this, or I don't know if you see it, but it was through their institutionalization of the sacred, through their sort of divinely ordained hierarchical structure, right, where they placed God above man and then nature above nature beneath both, right? We set up a way of looking at ourselves as inherently less than, but when in truth, and again, this is just backed up by fact, by living in actual reality, we are source experiencing itself in our unique form, just the way it is. I mean, you cannot want to look at your life that way, but we have the ability to create. We have the ability to manifest our own reality and our collective reality, right? So this is what I focus on in kind of in the first section, the fracture, and I go into deeper how our man-made systems cultivate the illusions, how they fragment us further, and I go into topics. I cover kind of a myriad of systems, from economic to education to healthcare to religion, and then I talk about the process of awakening, where when you come to the realization, when you see behind the veil, when you're able to recognize reality for what it truly is, and how it's difficult to stay there, to your point, right? How when you've built your entire identity, when the entire scaffolding of your identity is anchored in illusion. I mean, this is such a difficult thing to come to terms with. Right? I mean, this is
chuckling because it's terrifying. That's the truth. Right. It's and like your entire foundation gets shaken.
And this isn't even about like psychologically. This is about, this is about the nervous system. I mean, the nervous system gravitates towards, similar experience, even if the similar experience is bad, right? This is why you have people who are abuse victims, right? They keep going back, well, because they don't know what else is there. They're comfortable with the pain, right? In many ways, not even at such an extreme, but we as human beings we're kind of like seeking comfort. Like it could be cold comfort, but it's still comfort. We're okay with numbing ourselves, right? Without having to step over that. So I talk about the process of awakening and how empowering it actually is when you see things for what they are, what you actually gain from that process. And then I talk about integration. I talk about how, what embodying your truth is, your internal truth, and then living in coherence with who you truly are, and why this is really kind of, to me, the sacred path. This is kind of what it's all about. And you could read kind of, you could read trans psychological writers like Carl Jung and talk, they say that he says things like, the greatest gift of life is to truly know yourself, right? To truly know who you are, right? So, and excuse me, it's my belief that this is really what it's about. It's about living in alignment with your truth. And you don't get to live in alignment with your truth until you realize who you truly are. And we have created systems. We have embodied programs to live our life detaching ourselves from who we are to accommodate, all these systems. And it's important also. I want to say this very quickly because I think this gets missed, because it's not a one-sided discussion. It's really not about the fact that there's this program. There's many different programs. You can be on the completely, feminine side of the program where you're living in the different realm and you're floating around. Well, we're so entrenched in a lower vibrational program right now, but it's not that there's this program. It's about relinquishing the program and seeing the program for what it is and saying, I am not the program. There's something deeper here, right? So, and then I talk about at the end, parallel structures, different ways that we can rethink economy, different ways that we can rethink healthcare. Is that like the clap at the Oscars? It's like, get this guy off the stage.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Sacred Leadership
There
Show.
we go.
Sharice returns Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, 9 Mountain, and 8 Pacific on the InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. Until then, continue taking small steps today to be a leader in your life for the collective.